So today we're going to talk about Valorant agents and whether Riot is running out of ideas. Now this is not some bash on the Riot devs about Deadlock or anything, because I actually think they've done a pretty good job of making the game better this year. But what I'm talking about is the fact that quite a few of the latest agents are kind of doing similar things to other agents already in the game, and I'm not quite sure how long that can last. Let's give you an example with the newest agent, Deadlock. If we look at Deadlock's abilities and how she plays as an agent, it seems fairly obvious to me she is meant to be a competitor to Sage. They're both sentinels who have walls you have to shoot to get past, and they have another ability which severely restricts movement. Now you could argue that the ults are not that similar, and they each have another ability which is quite different as well, but to me, these two agents are clearly filling out the same subgenre of the sentinel class. Now, class subtypes, I think, is something that a lot of people struggle to understand or think about when they think about agents and their design. Particularly the Sentinel class is probably our best example, where how many times have you heard someone say, Chamber is not a Sentinel, Sage is not a Sentinel, right? They will commonly say this because in most people's minds, Cypher and Killjoy are true Sentinels, right? This is what a Sentinel should look like. It should look like Cypher and Killjoy. But if every Sentinel looked like Cypher and Killjoy, the Sentinel class would be horrific very, very quickly, right? Because there would just be no difference between them. And so, Chamber is a Sentinel, Sage and Deadlock are Sentinels, but they're just different subtypes of Sentinels, right? They're just doing it in slightly different ways. And Deadlock, what we're talking about here in today's video, is the fact that Riot keeps seemingly adding these kind of agents where, hey, there's only one barrier sentinel, right? We've only got one in this subtype. Let's add in another one to this to compete against whoever is already there. And to me, it's this filling out of the subgenres which I think might become a problem in time. Not necessarily now, but in time. Because if we go back to other recent agents that have come out, you'll find similar things to Deadlock. The most obvious example is perhaps Fade versus Sova, where the devs explicitly mentioned Sova's prominence in his recon role and thus came out with Fade to challenge him in that role. Now that made a lot of sense. Before Fade came out, Sova saw an absolute ton of play, as the ability to reveal people is a very strong one, and so having another agent do similar things but in a slightly different way and maybe different ranges to it was a very good idea. And today both Sova and Fade see a fair amount of play on different maps which fit their particular skill set. The next agent after Fade to come out, though, was Harbor, and as I'm sure many of you can guess, Harbor is a wall smoker. Before Harbor came out, there was only one wall smoker, and that was Viper. Now, as it turns out, these two have been paired together a lot in team comps and not necessarily played against each other as much, but that's probably fine and shows there's enough difference perhaps between the two to make that a viable idea. Now, in between Harbor and Deadlock, there was Gecko, and to be honest, Gecko is quite unique with his picking up of the orbs, something planting the spike or defusing the spike with Wingman, a completely different utility cycle and cooldown time. So it's not like every new agent that they have brought out has been a straight competitor to someone else in the game. And that does show there is still some room for Riot to come up with some creative ways of making some pretty different agents. However, when 3 of the last 4 agents that have come out have been a fairly direct competitor to someone who's already in the game, that does bring up the question, how long can this go on for? I mean, there's definitely still some subgenres where you could see Riot adding similar agents. Breach, I think, is a good example where, an initiator with no information gathering is just kind of a deep-lying, pure initiator like Breach. That's something else that they could add to challenge Breach. Or Chamber is another good example that we saw, where, he's the only duelist sentinel type. Or maybe another duelist who challenges someone like Raze as well could be another direction they go in. But eventually, and maybe sometime soon, Riot is going to run out of these subgenres where there's only one agent there. And that's going to bring up the question, what happens when you have 3 agents in certain subgenres? For instance, would adding another recon agent to contest with Sova and Fade make sense? How would you go about designing an agent that is a recon initiator, but is not like Sova and Fade? How would they be different to Sova and or Fade? How would you go about balancing such an agent that ensures that all 3 of those agents still see playtime? We know that other Riot games like League has, 160 whatever characters in them, but I highly doubt that Valorant could, ever even get near to that point. And in fact, even with something like 40 agents in the game, it seems very likely to me that, a good 10, 15, maybe even 20 of them would hardly see any play in both ranked and pro play if there was that many agents. So is Riot running out of ideas? Well, probably not, right? They've probably got plenty of agents in store for us, but you can see how this might be a problem if you just keep continuing down this, path, because eventually you're going to have to come up with some really wacky ideas to come up with fresh ways that aren't just, the same agent reskinned, essentially. And that brings up the question, should Riot have a maximum amount of agents for Valorant, right? Do they want to rotate agents in and out, and the problems and the benefits that brings? Who knows? Or maybe in a couple years' time, everyone in the lore will just die apart from Brimstone, and then Valorant 2 will come out, and an aging Brimstone will have to recruit new people for the Valorant protocol. Who knows? But let me know why that last idea is definitely the one that they should go for in the comments down below.